Every currency begins with a promise. Sometimes that promise is written explicitly, redeemable for gold on demand. Sometimes it's implied, backed by the full faith and credit of a state. But always, beneath the ink and seals lies the same fragile agreement. People will accept this paper tomorrow because they trusted it yesterday. For most of modern history, currency survival was not taken for granted. It was engineered. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the dominant economic order rested on a single stabilizing idea, the gold standard. Money was not merely issued, it was restrained. Governments could print notes, but only in proportion to the gold locked inside their vaults. This system limited political temptation. It also limited flexibility, and for decades, that trade-off seemed worth it. London sat at the center of this world. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, had mastered the art of credibility. Its power did not come from force, but from predictability. Merchants trusted the pound. Investors trusted British debt. The currency survived not because it was perfect, but because it was boring. Across the Atlantic, the United States entered the 20th century without a true central bank at all. Financial panics were common. Banks failed suddenly. Credit vanished overnight. After the Panic of 1907 nearly collapsed the system, policymakers reached a conclusion that would change everything. Modern currencies could not survive without a central authority to manage them. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was born. Its mandate sounded simple: stabilize the currency, smooth economic cycles, and prevent panic. But embedded inside that mandate was a quiet contradiction. Stability required restraint, crisis management required expansion, and every central bank would eventually be forced to choose between the two. At first, the system appeared stable. Industrial output surged, trade expanded, capital flowed freely across borders. A worker in Berlin, London, or New York could save money with confidence that its purchasing power would still exist years later. That confidence shaped behavior, long-term planning, investment, patience. But beneath the surface, vulnerabilities were already forming. The first was debt. Governments had learned during earlier wars that borrowing was politically easier than taxation. Debt could be postponed, pain could be delayed, and as long as growth continued, debt appeared manageable. Central banks became the quiet facilitators of this logic, ensuring markets remained liquid enough to absorb government bonds. The second vulnerability was faith. Currency systems do not fail when numbers break, they fail when belief breaks. And belief is influenced not just by policy, but by memory. People who had lived through stable decades trusted institutions reflexively. They assumed tomorrow would resemble yesterday. That assumption would not survive the 20th century. World War I shattered the old order. Gold convertibility was suspended across Europe overnight. Governments printed currency to fund mobilization on a scale never attempted before. This was framed as temporary, emergency measures, necessary sacrifices. And for a moment, it worked. Factories roared, employment surged, the numbers looked strong, but the pattern was already shifting, from discipline to discretion. After the war, nations faced a dilemma: return to hard money and accept painful adjustment, or preserve short-term stability by continuing expansion. Many chose the latter, believing they could manage the consequences later. Germany, burdened by reparations and internal political chaos, became the clearest early example, but it was not alone. Austria, Hungary, Russia, each followed variations of the same path. Currency issuance drifted further from productive capacity. Savings quietly eroded. Wages lacked prices. Most people did not notice at first. A shopkeeper sees margins tighten. A pensioner cuts back slightly. A worker demands a raise and gets it. The system absorbs the stress for a while. This is stage one of the pattern: invisible decay. Central banks rarely spoke publicly about these risks. Their language emphasized confidence, stability, control. Admitting vulnerability risked accelerating the very collapse they feared, so reassurance became policy. But here's where it gets interesting. Currencies don't collapse in silence. They collapse after long periods of apparent calm. The danger is not ignorance, it's normalization. When people adapt to small losses, they stop resisting. When erosion feels gradual, it feels manageable. And that sets the stage for the catalyst. Because once trust is weakened, it does not require much to break it entirely. A policy decision, a political shock, a sudden realization that tomorrow's money may be worth less than today's. Every major currency crisis follows this arc. Different countries, different decades.
And central banks, then as now, rarely tell the public how close the system is to the edge. Because currency survival has never been about printing power alone. It has always been about restraint, credibility, and timing. And when one of those fails, the pattern accelerates. Every currency crisis reaches a moment when the quiet erosion becomes impossible to ignore. For Germany, that moment arrives not with hyperinflation, but with a bill. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles imposes reparations that dwarf anything the modern world has seen. Germany is required to pay the equivalent of tens of billions of gold marks to the Allied powers, an obligation denominated not in its own currency, but in foreign money and hard assets, coal, steel, gold, goods Germany must earn, not print. At first, officials insist this is manageable. Growth will return, exports will rise, time will heal the damage. But here's the problem central banks rarely emphasize. Currency systems break when obligations exceed productive capacity. Germany's economy is damaged, its tax base is fragile, its political system is unstable, and yet the payments continue. When revenue falls short, the government turns to borrowing. When borrowing strains markets, the central bank intervenes. The Reichsbank begins purchasing government debt directly. This is framed as stabilization, temporary liquidity, a bridge to recovery. It is stage 2 of the pattern, monetization disguised as management. At first, the effects are subtle. Prices rise, but not explosively. The mark weakens, but trade continues. Workers receive higher nominal wages. Politicians point to employment numbers and declare success. But beneath the surface, the mechanics are relentless. Each new bond purchased by the central bank creates new marks. Those marks chase the same amount of goods. Foreign creditors demand payment in stable currencies. To acquire them, Germany must exchange ever larger quantities of its own money. The exchange rate slips, then slides, then collapses. By 1921, import prices surge. By 1922, inflation accelerates faster than wages can adjust. By early 1923, the pattern becomes visible to everyone. This is when psychology shifts. Money stops being a store of value and becomes a hot potato. Workers rush to spend wages the moment they're paid. Businesses raise prices not monthly, not weekly, but daily, sometimes hourly. A factory worker in Berlin receives wages at noon. By evening, the same bills buy half as much bread. By morning, less still. Employers begin paying twice a day, then 3 times, not out of generosity, but necessity. The central bank responds the only way it knows how. More liquidity, more support, more reassurance. Officials insist inflation is caused by speculators, by foreign pressure, by hoarding. But each intervention accelerates the loss of confidence. Here's the cruel paradox central banks rarely articulate. Once trust begins to fracture, stabilization tools amplify instability. Germany's crisis intensifies in January 1923 when French and Belgian troops occupy the Ruhr, the industrial heart of the country, after missed reparations deliveries. The government calls for passive resistance. Workers are told to strike but promised full pay. Pay funded entirely by newly printed money. What started as a fiscal problem becomes a monetary inferno. By mid-1923, the mark is no longer measured in exchange rates, but in absurdities. A loaf of bread costs millions, then billions. Savings evaporate, pensions become meaningless. Middle-class families, once the backbone of stability, are destroyed financially in months. This is stage 3, the realization phase. People understand collectively and suddenly that the currency will not survive. And when that realization spreads, no central bank decree can stop it. The catastrophe did not come from ignorance. It came from decisions made under pressure, justified as temporary, and extended far beyond their safe limits. Each choice, defensible in isolation, formed a chain reaction no one could reverse. And this wasn't unique to Germany. The pattern appears wherever governments face obligations they cannot meet honestly, and central banks step in to fill the gap quietly. Whether through war finance, social spending, or crisis response, the logic remains the same. Print now, stabilize later. But stabilization never comes without credibility, and credibility, once lost, does not return gradually. It collapses. In the next chapter, we follow what happens after confidence breaks completely, when money itself stops functioning and society is forced to adapt in ways no policymaker ever planned.